Hello, and welcome back to Start Adventuring, a channel dedicated to empowering new role players to break down their barriers and just start adventuring. I'm Ben.
And I'm Baxter. And in this week, we'll be looking at the 3 lessons from the first of the Candlekeep Mysteries, Joy of Extradimensional Spaces. As you guys probably realized, this video is coming out much later than when we did the live play. And a lot of it, you might find, is going to be similar to what was said in our first week in review. But since we started doing these 3 lesson videos separately, we just thought there would be some worth, especially for those who are interested in Joy of Extradimensional Spaces, in kind of having a separate video where we really focus in on these 3 lessons.
And especially if you're new to the channel, you may have missed that week in review. So these are just our 3 key takeaways from running the adventure as a one-on-one, one-shot adventure. But we think that it's applicable to anybody who's interested in running this adventure and anybody running the Candlekeep Mysteries in general. So with all that said, let's jump right into it. The first major lesson that we learned when we ran this adventure was that it's really important, especially with a one-shot, to set up the objective and the stakes in the adventure very clearly. That meeting with Matrius that happens when you first enter the mansion is key to establishing what the players will need to do once Matrius has disappeared, and also why they should be compelled to do it. Like, the imp attacking Matrius is meant to be a sort of indicator of danger, but if you're not clear about that, I know that Baxter, in our running of it, was very confused as to what was going on and what he was supposed to do.
Right. I mean, we talked about it, I think, a little bit in our Patreon video for week 1. I think also in the week in review. Like, I was under the impression that Matrius was going to a room in the mansion that he had, not back to the room that I had just come from. And then in turn, too, like, I didn't realize that the imp was dangerous, because I don't, like, when he went through, the imp was a statue. And so, and then I had agreed to live there or like stay there and learn stuff. So I didn't know if I was meant to be in the mansion. It was like all very like disconnected pieces, right? But I still think so. Yeah, the main thing is that the meeting with Matrius, or in any context where the player character is getting the information to kickstart the story, the motivation, and the kind of exposition, for lack of a better word, should be pretty clear and direct.
Yeah, and I mean, the other thing is, so like the homunculi are meant to be a device to give a hint toward the objective, but you can't guarantee that your players are going to find them or understand what they're talking about at the point when they do find them. It would probably be better, if you're trying to do this more quickly or make it more obvious to your players, to just have Matrius have more information to give them. Maybe he's already found one of the books. He just doesn't know how to get the piece of the puzzle from the book, or something like that. It does depend on how much time you want to give your players to figure it out and how many players you have.
Right.
Because if you only have one player, that's only one brain to try to figure out what's going on and how to manage it. So be aware of the number of players you have and the amount of time you anticipate it to take to finish the adventure and understand what's going on. It's also super important. We also talked about a ticking clock when we talk about stakes, because I was thinking of this adventure as like a D&D escape room, but without having some kind of ticking clock, whether it's, you know, the demons in the basement, or the master of the mansion is coming home and is mad that you're there, or something like that. Right. I think that would also elevate the adventure of it, you know?
There's a lot to be said about Matrius, or the exposition as it's given's ability to set tone. If Matrius is afraid of the mansion, the player character might very well be afraid of it. But when, like, for example, when I met Matrius, he was like enthralled with this beautiful sprawling mansion. So I thought it was like this, you know, heavily explorative, go find what you need in all of this splendor kind of a thing. Which is maybe fun, not super fun for a one-on-one shot with no additional stakes. But like you could make that motif work in different contexts. Do you know what I mean? So I think it just
Right.
depends on what tone you're looking for, and understanding that Matrius or whoever is giving the exposition could be a great tool in setting that.
Absolutely.
Our second lesson is that you can have fun with kind of the structural layout of the mansion, or I guess even more specifically, like the pathway that your player character takes when they get into the mansion. What I think could be a really fun idea is plop them in a locked room with Matrius, and then when Matrius disappears, they have to find a way out of that room first. And that kind of sets the precedent that they might have to escape the larger rooms of the mansion, starting with this one singular room that they have to break out of to start.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I mean, just in general, it's an adventure that lends itself to exploration, but don't take that to mean you shouldn't guide your player at all.
Right.
Especially in a situation like we had where it's just one player, right? So there needs to be a little more clear direction because you don't have multiple people to split up and talk about different options and things like that. I think your idea is really great. Also, you could just make the mansion a little bit more linear in terms of how many rooms there are off of hallways and rooms leading to other rooms, as opposed to a situation where it's sort of like there's a long hallway with 5 doors, and then you end up in a situation.
What's behind door number 2?
Right. Which can be fun
Sure.
in a certain context, but you have to be aware of how long the adventure you're planning to run is, and also just, is that the kind of thing your players are interested in? Because there's a lot of like old school Dungeons and Dragons, which is more, you don't know anything and it's all about exploring the dungeon. But some newer players may not find that in and of itself really compelling,
Sure, and I also think, to your point, like, I think there's a lot to be said about the party size, right? If there's 1 or 2 people, it's going to have to be much more linear than if you have 6, 7 PCs that are each going to one room, so ultimately things will get solved, period. But if it's just one person, it's going to take so much more time to get to each room.
We talked about the Scooby-Doo gang element.
Right.
Because when it's one person, it's more like Luigi's Mansion, right? Mm-hmm. That's what I thought of as we were playing. But, if you've got a party of people that might, split up gang, then having it be more wide open works better. Right. But if you have a party that's for sure going to stick together and go through it in kind of a linear fashion, you can do some changes that will make that feel more satisfying, as opposed to just, okay, well, I checked this door. Is the thing there? I don't know.
Right. I think the end of this is just, it depends on what your players at the table like. Do they like heavy exploration, or are they more interested in direct narrative?
And speaking of narrative, the last lesson that we learned running this adventure is that it could be useful to try to connect some of the dots for your players with regard to the story overall.
Right.
This module sets up a lot of really interesting, lore and questions about what's going on in this mansion. Who are the people who made it? What is Matrius's interest with it? The module doesn't answer these questions on its own, which you shouldn't take to mean it doesn't matter, but instead it should be an inspiration for you to see where there might be dots to connect, right? Like, what's Matrius doing with this imp figurine, and why does it come to life and attack him? Maybe he has more nefarious kind of designs in the mansion. There are things that maybe, especially if you're doing this as a one-shot and it's got to feel like this contained adventure and storyline, connecting those dots can make it feel like there's more of a payoff at the end.
Right. And the other thing that I think with it too is it kind of comes down to the narrative design that your players create and generate on their own. Like, a larger group of players are going to come up with their own story just by their actions, whereas a smaller party, they kind of rely on a through line, right? Of kind of a start, middle, end of the adventure kind of points that that you're, goals, so to speak, that they're trying to achieve. Whereas a larger party, they will inevitably, in their path of doing other things, just statistically, they will probably complete those goals.
Right.
So it's less of a clear dedication, at least for all of them.
It also comes down to, is this an adventure that you're fitting into a campaign
Right.
as has been suggested by Wizards of the Coast with this book, or are you running it as an isolated one-shot adventure to kind of teach players, a level 1 character about exploring a place and doing different kinds of checks to find information and stuff like that? Like, knowing how it fits into your game at your table is also sort of important to understanding whether you need to supply a lot of information or whether it's just a cool, mysterious setting for your already established party to deepen their ongoing adventures in. You know what I mean?
No, totally. I think that we've discussed this before, but I think that the adventures that are more exploration based are definitely much more suited for kind of cutting into a previously running campaign. Because again, if that is the case, it's kind of a side quest, right? Like, it doesn't necessarily need to rely so heavily on that through line that we're talking about.
Right, because it's just something that comes up along the way for your characters who are already doing this thing. But it's tricky when you consider that this is a level 1 adventure.
Right.
Because you
Yes.
think that it's something that's meant to kick off, potentially, a larger campaign, which means that you do need to kind of do a little bit of extra work to figure out how these seeds might actually lead into further adventures for your party.
All right, well, that does us this time. Ben and I really enjoyed coming back to these 3 lessons after, a couple weeks into the mysteries. We think that all of these insights are probably very helpful, but just remember that you can do whatever you want to do in your campaigns, and so much just comes down to you as a DM and your table. The point is to have fun, and as long as we're doing that, we're all good.
Yeah, we came back to this when we ran the adventure. We ran it the day the book came out.
Right.
So it's super interesting to have the benefit of hindsight, but also to understand that the way that we ran it was in that context, and you might run it completely different. If you've got lessons that you learned from running this adventure or thoughts on it based on reading it, maybe you're planning to run it, let us know in the comments down below.
Yes,
and be
please.
sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We'd love to have you be a part of the Start Adventuring community, and it makes us happy every time we see new people are subscribing. If you want to go the extra mile to support the channel, you can see our full-length discussions of all of the adventures that we've run so far on our Patreon. The link to that will be in the description down below. But that'll do it for these 3 lessons. We hope you found them interesting and helpful, and we hope that your adventures are great too. Until next time, I'm Ben.
And I'm Baxter. And remember, start adventuring.
Just start adventuring.